we're constantly lying to ourselves. We were taught unconsciously to lie to ourselves from a very young age. Oh, I feel fine. I'm great. I don't need anyone. I don't need anything. I don't need my... When deep down, we're in pain. And so I would ask each person just to sit with, what lies am I telling myself? Ego doesn't want to change. Ego wants everyone else to change. It wants your spouse to change, your children to change, the government to change, but it doesn't want to change because it's well-intended, because it's fearing change. And so if we can just begin with, what lies am I telling myself? It's a simple question, but not always easy to just be with. We stay in relationships that we know are not aligned. We work jobs that we hate. We constantly betray ourselves, saying yes when we mean no to get love, validation, and approval. So if we can just start with the truth. There is no surrender without truth. There is no real transformation without truth.
All right, welcome back to the episode, or today's episode of the Better Human Podcast. We have got an incredible guest today, Kute Blackson. Brother, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks for having me, man.
Well, we are honored to have you because you are a renowned author and transformational teacher. And I think the world needs more and more and more of this lesson. And more than that, just not just lessons, the tools to practice this stuff. So what I'd love to do with you today is learn as much as we can selfishly, and I'm sure the audience will get it as well. But why don't we kick off with your book, The Magic of Surrender? Talk to me about that title and where did this come from?
Wow. It's interesting. This was not the book that I wanted to write. This was not the book I intended to write. This was not the book I planned to write. I had my own agenda to write a different sort of book. I sat down one day after my first book came out, was a bestseller, and I thought, I want to write another book. This time I want to write a mega bestseller. You know, you see all these books like The Magical Art of Tidying Up and The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck and this and that. And I thought, I want to write something like that. And I sat down with an entire whiteboard full of ideas, and I was strategizing and brainstorming, and I thought I'd be intelligent. And I came up with probably 75 ideas of things I thought would be bestsellers. Books I thought my publisher would want, books I thought my audience would want, books I thought would hit the New York Times bestseller list. And when I looked at this entire whiteboard full of ideas, they were amazing, they were great. But the truth is, if I was honest, none of those felt aligned. None of those felt really authentic. None of those lit up my soul in any way where I felt the integrity of the energy in the theme and the topic. And the only word that really lit me up was the word that was written at the bottom of this whiteboard, and it said surrender. And that's when I looked at this and I thought, oh shit, that's the book. And I literally felt the energy behind this word. And I felt as though this was the book that was seeking to be written. And I felt as though it had a soul of its own. And so I had to go through an entire process of surrendering to the book about surrender. And when I did, it was as though I looked at my life and everything about my life began to make sense. Everything about my childhood began to make sense. Everything about my upbringing just fell into place, and I understood many things. And I literally felt as though in my bones, I felt as though I was engineered to write this book and tell the story and reframe, reposition, surrender for the new generation in a new context, in a new light, in a new understanding. And so that's how it came about, essentially. And also in that moment, I would say that, look, my mother died in 2017. And so in that moment, I had a flashback to 2016, 2017. So my mother was diagnosed with stomach cancer. And she was the person I loved the most. She's a little Japanese woman, full of love, full of purity, full of sincerity. I mean, if anything, was a freaking saint in so many ways. I didn't realize it as a kid, but in this process,
Realize it afterwards, right?
Yeah, after it's too late, you know. And so she's diagnosed with stomach cancer. I'm living in LA. She's in London. I began flying back and forth from LA to London literally every month for a week to be with her, take her to chemo, take care of her, do my best to clean, cook, you know, just whatever she needed for a week. And I'd fly back. And this was my life for an entire year in between work. And what started out, I would say, as the worst year of my life ended up being the best year of my life. And I see now that the seeds for the book it was planted during this year, and I didn't even know. I was not even aware. And so about 6 months into this process, the doctors finally said to us, look, there's nothing else we can do for you. You're going to die. So put your affairs in order. And we don't know if you're going to have days, weeks, months, certainly not years. So just get ready. And I felt such a depth of heartbreak and grief. I've been preparing myself for this moment for the last months. But the reality of seeing the person you love the most on this planet and realizing that you will never have another moment with her was just, it was devastating. And so I remember looking my mother in the eyes and I said to her 2 questions. The first one was, are you afraid? Like you're going to die. Like this is it now. Are you afraid?
What was her answer?
And she looked at me and she said, no, I'm not afraid. And she was in such peace. She said, I'm not afraid because I know I'm not this body. This body is just a temporary vehicle for my soul. This body will die at some point, and maybe that point is now. But what I truly am, my soul, my spirit, will live forever, and I'll be with you on the other side. And so I'll be guiding you, so I'm not afraid. And then I looked at my mother and I asked, I felt the profundity of that realization. And then I asked her, what can I do for you? I want to be a good son. Like, what do you need? What can I buy? Where can I take you? Like, what do you need in your final days? What do you want to make your final days easier? And my mother looks at me and she says, very simply, there's nothing I want and there's nothing I need. I said, what do you mean? She said, all I want is what God wants for my life, nothing else. In that moment, I realized that she was free. This entire year, she didn't complain, never once felt like a victim. And she was a very emotional woman, didn't cry. She was in peace this entire year. And I saw that in that moment, in the face of her death, in the face of her mortality, in the face of everything falling apart, she was equally at peace. And I saw that she was surrendered. She had been demonstrating and living this principle of surrender in the midst of this very difficult experience. And so I saw the power of surrender. Even, it's easy to surrender when you get what you want, when life goes your way. But what about when you're about to die? And so she wasn't attached to living. She wasn't attached to dying. She was surrendered to the highest unfolding of her soul's journey. And that was her peace. And so I saw that surrender is the password to freedom. And that's when I realized, as I was looking at this whiteboard, I realized in a very simple yet profound way that surrender is the most powerful thing that we can do. That surrender is the real secret to true, authentic manifestation. That if you look at the great ones, whether it's Jesus, whether it's Buddha, whether it's Gandhi, whether it's Martin Luther King, whether it's Mandela, whether it's Bruce Lee, whether it's Muhammad Ali, at some point, all of these individuals got to the point of their lives where they surrendered themselves to that purpose that was bigger than themselves. They surrendered themselves to God, the divine, this infinite intelligence, their soul, that deeper calling. And in that surrender, they were able to transcend their human limitations, and they tapped into another dimension of life and potential. And that's when I think life began to use them, and life began to express through them, and life began to kind of manifest through them. And that's when they were able to go beyond, I think, whatever they could have created with their limited personal power, ego, sense of human capacity. And that's when I think the magic happened. And so the book is called The Magic of Surrender, because we all want magic. Everybody wants magic. Magic is that which is beyond our mind's capacity to imagine. But very few of us were willing to surrender. But the real formula is, if you want more magic, you have to surrender. And so in our culture today, I think there is, just to set the context for our conversation, there's kind of a misconception about surrender. This idea that surrender is weak, that surrender is passive, that surrender is giving up, that surrender is waving the white flag, that if you surrender, you're going to be left behind, you're going to be a doormat, you're going to be a victim, you're going to be, taken advantage of, you won't manifest your goals, dreams, and desires. If you surrender, you're going to get less in life. I'm actually saying, no, if you truly, truly understand surrender and truly surrender, what if you didn't get less, but you actually got more than you could have intended, maybe not what you wanted or thought you wanted or expected, but better and more and different and more amazing. And so surrender is a letting go of control, or I should say the illusion that we are in control. Control is a master addiction. Surrender is when we stop trying to force life to fit our limited idea of how we think it should be and who we think we should be, so that we can take the limitations off of life and be available and be open and be receptive to allow this intelligence that is life to guide us and show us and lead us. And so that's the essence of surrender and the essence of the book.
That's amazing. I was going to ask you sort of what it is to surrender and stuff. And I think you've answered it, which is, one, something bigger than ourselves, right? And whatever you want to call it, a higher intelligence, God, who knows, but like there is something bigger than ourselves. And it's around letting go of that control, forcing the outcome, forcing the book to be done. And it's interesting about your story, because as you began, you were like, I began the exercise, forcing myself to go through this exercise for everyone else. It was for the publishers. It was for the audience. It was for the title. It was for the success and the glory and the this is what it can be. And you were, even in the story, and I'm just paraphrasing that, you were like, it just wasn't happening. The more I tried to force it and the more I tried to, shove it. My father used to describe this. You could shove the square peg through the round hole, right? The damage is going to cause along the way. You might eventually get it there, but it's not going to be a square by the time it's end. Yeah. My condolences for your mom, and, where I come from, we say, I wish you health and long life. And I had a very similar story with my father, 2012, also diagnosed with cancer. Was given a timeline, 12 months, and literally to that day he passed. And that's when I sort of found myself, and as you're describing it, myself surrendering to the fact that my calling and my cause is here. And my mother said this to me, where she was like, and I've said this many times, that your father's greatest gift to you was his passing, was his death. And that was in two ways. One, we get screened, or I get screened every year for cancer. And two, the ability to let go, and I'll use your terminology, surrender to the path you're supposed to be on, right? And run with it. It's amazing. So when we talk about surrender, little more specifically for the audience, how do we surrender? I mean, what would be, how do we even recognize we should surrender? And then, what do we do to go through that process?
Yeah, I would say there's not like a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 step formula. Right. Because if it was like that, then on some level, everybody would be doing it. But I think that you can recognize perhaps that a surrender is needed or required or being invited, because in many ways you will feel some pain in life. And when you feel some pain in life, you know that you're either forcing, expecting, pushing life a certain way, holding on so tightly, or clearly on some path that is not necessarily aligned with your authentic soul's expression. And so if there's some pain in life, that is often a sign that you're holding on to something so tightly, an idea, an identity, a vision, a relationship, and it may not be working. And so there's an opportunity. I think, look, surrender is our natural state. That's the first thing I want people to know, because there's this idea that, well, surrender is so difficult. Surrender feels difficult, and we'll address that. Like, it feels difficult, and I'll share why. It seems difficult. It appears difficult. But the truth is, it's innate. It's natural. If you remember when we were all children at one point, we were surrendered. A child is surrendered. We poop when we feel like it. We're free. We're just in touch with our essence. We weren't resisting. We were curious. We weren't forcing. We were just being whatever we were being. We would poop when we felt like pooping. We jump on the table naked. We didn't care what we looked like on Instagram. We would just sing. We didn't know what that was and what it was, whether we were as good as Celine Dion or Bruno Mars or Adele. We were just being surrendered to the moment, fully curious, just allowing things to unfold. And so I think it helps to understand, like, what happened, and what is it, and why is it that surrender seems difficult? Surrender feels difficult because the ego that which we mistakenly perceive ourselves to be, based on mind, body, name, past history, memories, traumas, belief systems, and structures that we identify ourselves as, this idea of what we believe ourselves to be, the ego, is what resists surrender. Because for the ego, our mistaken sense of identity, for the ego, surrender feels like a death. It's like, I'm dying. And so the job of the ego is to, we could say, to make sure that we don't get hurt again like we were hurt when we were young, when bad things happen, when negative things happen, when painful things happen. So the ego is often a reaction or a creation to avoid feeling that pain again, that we've now become this version of ourselves. And you could say the job of the ego is to reinforce its existence and identity. So when you say surrender and let go, and for the ego, it's terrifying. And so we hold on. And so for good intention, the ego tends to hold on and resist and tries to control, because mistakenly we have this belief or this sort of unconscious programming based on our conditioning that if I can control everything, then I won't get hurt like I was hurt when I was 5. And so we were these free beings. We were full of light, full of essence, full of divine energy. We would just run around. And so we incarnate into this human experience. And we meet our parents. God bless them. We all have unique parents, some amazing, some hopefully enlightened, and many not enlightened.
and they break us in half.
and they shrivel us into pieces in many ways and condition us. And look, they're just doing the best that they know how to do based on their parents and their generational patterning and their grandparents. And so now we're born into this sort of generational conditioning. Maybe dad is crazy. Maybe mom is an alcoholic. Maybe they're fighting all the time. Maybe there's mental, emotional, verbal, sexual abuse in some way, some dysfunction. Maybe they're great people, but they just didn't have the emotional intelligence to know how to meet our needs. And that was painful. And so 2 things happen. The first thing is we learn, often unconsciously, all sorts of strategies to shut down, disconnect, not feel the pain of our environment, and we suppress, layers and layers and layers and layers of sort of unprocessed, unfelt emotion that begins to cover up our light. We begin to close our hearts, disconnect from our feeling capacity, because it's too painful to feel that mom and dad are fighting all the time. It's too painful to feel that mom isn't around. It's too painful to feel helpless, that my emotional needs aren't being met. So if I just control, disconnect, shut down, not feel, disconnect from my feeling, my heart, go into my mind and suppress my feelings, then I can function and survive. And so now we go through life in this sort of conditioned way of being as a strategy of control to just deal with reality and deal with life. And then we also learn all sorts of strategies to the sense of who do I need to be, right, in order to get love and validation and approval. Now we contort ourselves into a certain shape, a certain person of who we think we need to be in order to get love, validation, and approval. And the version of ourselves that we've learned to become is who we mistakenly think that we are, that we become so identified with, and it gets reinforced by life and society and university and, family system. And we actually think that who we've become is who we are.
Right.
Not realizing that what we've ended up becoming is often a reaction, a conditioned version of ourselves. And so this holding on sense of identity is ego. And the degree to which we believe ourselves to be this, which we tend to believe ourselves to be, that is the degree to which change, transformation, reinventing ourselves, and surrender can feel difficult. Yeah. And so if we can begin to understand that we are not our thoughts. Thoughts change. We are not our emotions. Emotions change. We are not those beliefs. Those beliefs change. We don't believe certain things that we believe, but so often we really believe ourselves to be the beliefs that we have, and yet we're not those things. And so if we can start to understand the nature of what we are and what we're not, begin to understand the nature of the ego, that we are not that, then rather than even forcing ourselves to surrender, or forcing ourselves to change, if we can begin to understand, okay, I'm not this, we can begin to observe ourselves, begin to question ourselves, begin to watch and witness ourselves, and begin to, let's say, hold ourselves with a bit of compassion. And sometimes that compassion means acknowledging that you're not surrendered right now, acknowledging the underlying positive intention of why you're not changing, why you're resisting, why you're not transforming, why you're not letting go, so to speak, even though it's a great thing, and actually just meet yourself with a bit of compassion, because even underlying the resistance is a positive intention. And so the ego's job is to protect you. So when you can understand that underlying this mechanism of ego, which is resisting, is fear, then you can begin to hold your ego and resistance with some love, some kindness, some tenderness, some compassion. And that begins to develop a relationship with yourself that you can start kind of facilitating some inner cooperation. So I think just starting with awareness and compassion is a key. And then we have to be willing to question ourselves, because in many ways we don't question ourselves. And I think one of the places that people can start, I speak about this a lot, I think one of the places that people can start to begin the process of surrendering is not necessarily like, boom, just surrender, because the ego is in a self-protective sense and mode. I think one of the things that keeps us stuck are the ways that we lie to ourselves in so many ways. The ego doesn't want to change. It's a strategy of the ego.
Just wants to reinforce the story that it already knows.
It's protection. It means well. It's like a friend that means well. And what worked for us when we were 5 works for us when we're 10. But by the time we're 25 and 35 and 45, and 50, it stops working. It starts limiting us. And so if we can just understand, the ego doesn't want to change, not because it's bad, it's just because it's self-protection. Right. And so when we can shift that and understand that, then it changes your relationship with it. And so one of the strategies that the ego uses is denial. And so we're constantly lying to ourselves as a way to preserve our sense of self and life and identity and who we are. Because if I change, it's kind of a death to the ego. If I change my belief system, if I change how I see life, if I change my paradigm, if I reinvent who I am, it's like ego feels like who I am is going to die, because who I am is my beliefs, who I am is my thoughts, who I am is my feelings. And so there's an internal fight. And so you don't have to fight the ego. You don't have to kill the ego, but we do get to just be with it and love the ego and hold it. And so one of the strategies is we're constantly lying to ourselves. We were taught unconsciously to lie to ourselves from a very young age. Oh, I feel fine. I'm great. I'm good. I don't need anything. I don't need anyone. I don't need anything. I don't need when deep down we're in pain. And so I would ask each person just to sit with a beginning point. What lies am I telling myself? Just sit with that question. Like, what lies am I telling myself? Ego doesn't want to change. Ego wants everyone else to change. It wants your spouse to change, your children to change, the government to change, but it doesn't want to change because it's well-intended, because it's fearing change. And so if we can just begin with, what lies am I telling myself? Just sit with that. It's a simple question, but not always easy to just be with. What lies am I telling myself? We stay in relationships that we know are not aligned. We work jobs that we hate. We constantly betray ourselves, saying yes when we mean no to get love, validation, and approval. So if we can just start with the truth, there is no surrender without truth. There is no real transformation without truth. And so if you can just sit with, what lies am I telling myself? And just start telling yourself the radical truth. Sometimes we're afraid to tell ourselves the truth because we're afraid of the consequences of what will happen if we tell the truth. And so we continue staying stuck in denial, which keeps us safe.
And then it becomes real in the future. So when we acknowledge that truth and it hits, now all of a sudden it's a reality. Now it's something that I can't turn away from.
Yes.
As I'm listening to you talk, I'm reminded of I wrecked my back in the day, right? Blew out some discs, fine, obviously. But if you've ever hurt your back, it's paralyzing in the sense that your entire muscle is contracted, everything is stiff, everything is tight. And the more you try to move, the more it hurts. And you're in this kind of S sort of shape. But the exact thing that you need to do in order to heal or fix the back is to move into the stretching, the stuff that is going to hurt, because your back is in spasm, and it's in spasm because it's protecting, right? And it's only, the back only heals once that muscle starts to release and stuff. And it's a little bit like the ego that you're describing right now, which is we get so hanging on to what we've defined ourselves to be. And I think maybe this is part of what you're talking about as well, which is the problem in the world today is everyone has this defined story of who they are as their authentic self. I am authentic. This is my authentic self. This is who I am. And it's that ego driving. And I see it in the thought leadership space. I'm a coach. Well, what are the motivations? And I ask people a lot this, right? What are your motivations for being a coach? I love to help people. I'm like, I think you get more out of that for your own ego because it feels really good to give people advice. And when they take the advice and they win with it, it fills you up. But that's not the reason to be a coach, right? And if you're not aware of these things, you're just repeating and reinforcing that internal story. I talk to a lot of people about the fact that these mental models in our head become these movies, right? And we project them. Yep. And I'm sure you've heard of this, the relationship between self-esteem and self-image. So self-esteem is my confidence. Self-image is the perception that I have on how the world sees me. Mm-hmm. And my self-esteem has a lot to do with what my perception is of how the world sees me. And if I'm not careful, I'm projecting this negativity, right? Oh, they see me in a negative way, which then contributes to my self-esteem being weak, which then in turn reinforces that perception. And what we got to recognize is it's not them that I have to worry about. It's not them that I'm trying to manage. It's me. It's this exercise of becoming aware. I talk to a lot of people about self-awareness, and I want to ask you about spiritual awareness, which is what you're describing. But self-awareness is a very uncomfortable thing. It's not looking at how great you are. It's not looking at how fantastic you are. This is where people get caught up in these assessments, right? I'm a blue and I'm a green. I'm an eagle and a parrot, right? Like it's reinforcing that ego of who they want to be versus the true self-awareness is taking the responsibility for the dysfunction within my personality, the perceptions I need to manage, right? The exercise that I need to put in. Is spiritual awareness something similar to that? And how would is everything what you're describing spiritual awareness?
Yeah, look, I think spiritual awareness starts with the truth. Because there's no real spirituality without the truth, telling yourself the truth. I think many times we want to feel the elevated blue light, open our kundalini, open our pineal gland, float into the clouds and feel our infinite self. But the thing is, whenever you come out of that sort of high meditation, you come back into this human vehicle structure called the body, called the mind, called this ego vehicle. And if you haven't dealt with the mental, emotional, baggage, right? The unprocessed stuff, then you won't be able to sustain the true nature of what you are and have always been. You won't be able to sustain that connection, even though it's always there. And so for me, like truth is real spirituality. I tell people, stop meditating, stop praying, stop doing yoga. Tell the freaking truth. Like the truth. I hate my job. The truth. I have an alcohol problem. The truth. Like I'm no longer in love with my wife. The truth is I'm in pain. Like the truth will set you free. And I think telling yourself the truth, because it's all the lies that we tell ourselves that kind of cover up layers and layers and layers and layers, cover up our true spirit. The true awareness of what we are gets covered up, and the ability to sustain that connection gets covered up with the lies that we tell ourselves, about the stories we tell ourselves, the sort of perception of who we think we are and who we're not. And so I think if we start with the truth, a lot of the stuff, a lot of the problems, a lot of the issues that we pray about, meditate about, go to temple about, do yoga about, will dissolve. And so I would just say, to me, spirituality starts with the truth. It's the truth that sets us free. And spiritual awareness, like, what is spirituality? Like, what is it? Really?
That was going to be,
right?
break that down for me.
Yeah, in our day and age today, like, bro, what is spirituality? Is it like doing a cacao ceremony, doing a plant medicine ceremony? Is it the fact that I'm wearing a bindi on my third eye? Is it that I got some, selenite, organite beads and I'm rocking a big mala? Is it that I drink green juice? Is it that, like, so what?
I live in Costa Rica, right? And that is the
well, if you're still right. If you're still an asshole, if you're still unkind, if you're cheating on your wife, if you're abusing your child, if you're betraying friends, if you can't keep your word, if you can't show up on time, if you like, none of that means anything if you just can't, you could say, be kind. There is a difference between acting spiritual and living spiritual. There's a difference between acting spiritual and truly growing spiritually. And it has nothing to do with the trappings and the form and the car you drive, and you drive with this, you do with that, you eat this diet, you don't eat that diet. It's being connected to the deeper dimension of yourself beyond the ego. And I think what starts happening, and I don't care if you're a billionaire, I don't care if you're vegan, I don't care if you are carnivore, I think you can tell that you're going spiritually in a few ways. You begin to lose interest in yourself. You begin to lose interest in your story. You begin to lose interest in your own, the drama of your own identity and ego. It just ceases to kind of be interesting to you anymore. And so that's a sign. Like, you can be vegan, you cannot be vegan. I know a lot of vegans that think they're spiritual, but they're so dramatic and so victim, in victim consciousness. And so you know that you're going spiritually when you just don't take yourself and your story so seriously anymore. You also, I would say, you start becoming less judgmental, of other people, because you start moving out of the sense of me and you and separation, and you start to own those projections that you're putting out there onto Donald Trump, onto your neighbor, onto your in-law, and you start seeing, wow, there's an aspect of me that is that, or there's a part of me that has that potential, and that sense of separation begins to dissolve. And I think also in that you begin to become more loving. And so I would say true spiritual awareness is the deeper awareness of your true nature, and your true nature, which is love. You are love itself. And as you start connecting to that true essence of what you are beyond conditioning as love, then if I recognize I'm love, then I also recognize that what you are is love. And in that inherent recognition of the oneness, that shared oneness of what we are and we all are, loving, becoming more kind, living more kindly with those around us is a natural expression, I think, of deeper spiritual awareness. And so so some of the most spiritual people I know are people that wouldn't consider themselves spiritual. They've never done yoga, they've never meditated, but how they live their life is beautiful. Is kind. And some of the most, non-spiritual people, some of the most spiritual people are actually like the most non-loving people, because they're so focused on themselves and their meditation and their green juice and their everything and And I'm like, really? Like that? So for me, it has to be lived,
I love what you talk about. I just related that to me. I do not consider myself a spiritual person, right? However, what you described is this is the way I live, right? And I actually was chatting with my wife the other day, and I can't remember what it was, but I remember saying to her, you know what, babe, it's super easy to be nice and kind. Yes. So easy, right? That's all we need to do in life is just be nice and kind. And quick story, I went to play. So I broke my knee about 17, 18 weeks ago, and I broke it playing tennis. And yesterday I went to go play the first tennis game with the group and where I live in the development. And there's a lady there, and she's our neighbor. And it was July 4th, right, on Tuesday. One of the neighbors was playing music, and she was talking to me, and she's complaining, and she's this and she's that. And anyway, I'm talking, and she looks at me, she's like, "You're so diplomatic." I'm like, I'm not diplomatic, but I think if we were to look at this from a different perspective, this is how I look at the situation, right? And this is how I would approach it, which was a little bit of like, if there was an issue, be a really good neighbor and be patient and stuff. And, if it continued, then go and have a conversation and be a good neighbor and just, discuss these things. But people are too busy sort of, living in their own issue and challenge. And as you were talking about these sort of fake spiritual warriors, I think about the people that have got the T-shirt that says spiritual gangster, right? I'm not sure if you have one. If you've got a shirt that says spiritual gangster, you get to wear it. But it becomes like one of these yoga things, right?
Well, it becomes, and here's the danger. It becomes another identity.
Correct.
And identity is suffering, which is what we were kind of touching on a bit earlier. Identity is suffering. Identity is ego. And you could say real spirituality is living, free of identity. Mm-hmm. And so you can be a yogi who's full of identity. Like, look at my mala beads, look how spiritual I am, and you're not because you don't meditate. And that is, you could say, more egoic than the billionaire who just doesn't give a shit about any of his money, uses it to serve people, and is just kind, right? Yeah. And so identity is really the real renunciation. People think, renunciation, that means I have to give up everything and go move to the Himalayas. Real renunciation is a surrendering, a letting go, a renunciation of identity, right. Holding on to that sense of identification. And that's the freedom. And I think that's real spirituality.
We were chatting before about fathers, and I shared a little bit of a story about mine. One of the things I had to let go was being my father's son when I had to, in coming into my own, which is, I'm not always defined by him. Yeah. Right? And that's the way I used to describe myself in work. Right. And, a person came up to me one day and they said, you realize how much power you lose every single time you move the conversation away into your father. And I wanted to ask you about that as well, because you had a very specific upbringing with an identity and an expectation of who you were going to be, what you were going to become, et cetera. Can you tell us that story really quickly?
Yeah,
how you had to let go of that identity. What was that moment?
I think it's been a process, an evolving process in stages. Like my first memories with my father was seeing a crippled woman picking up the gravel, that he walked on. He didn't even know, and wiping it on her face and standing up. And so week after week, I grew up seeing like in front of my eyes. People, it's a scam. But I grew up seeing it, like no cameras, no fakery, just like we're in an office and somebody walks in, he touches them and they freaking stand up. And so, the shit is real, it's real. And so, miracles. I mean, he'd look at a woman in a wheelchair and say, stand up, but I haven't walked. Stand up. Do you believe? Yeah. Then stand up. And they would stand up. And it was, to be honest, now I think about it, it sounds crazy. But as a kid, it felt completely normal because it's all I knew. There was nothing unique and special about it at all, And so, as a kid, I grew up, my father built 300 churches in Ghana, West Africa, had a huge church in London, hundreds of thousands of people in Ghana. He was the spiritual teacher to the president at the time in the 70s, to 3 kings, 2 other presidents in Ghana, presidents in Ivory Coast and Nigeria, and heads of state in Africa. And so I started speaking when I was age 8, and I was ordained at 14 as a minister. And my entire life was basically scripted out for me by my father.
You were going to be.
I was going to be the successor.
Prodigy. Yeah,
I was going to be the guy, and it's not just my father. It's hundreds of thousands of people are pinning their hopes and expectations on you, right. and so it's a little bit of pressure. It's a little bit of pressure. But I also didn't know anything else, and so. All I knew was something doesn't feel right. That's what I knew. Something doesn't feel in alignment with my soul's expression and destiny. And I was just too afraid as a 14-year-old kid to say anything. So I went along with it. And so part of my coming into myself, it was like phase 1 was I began sneaking into my father's office. He had 1,000 books on his bookshelf, Eastern mystics, Indian gurus, spiritual teachers, to Wayne Dyer, Louise Hay, Deepak Chopra, Marianne Williamson. And I would sneak into his bookshelf as an 11, 12-year-old kid and devour these books. And I became obsessed with self-help and spirituality. And this became my life. And so through that process, by the time I turned 18, I knew that I had a different path. I felt my soul calling me to come to the US. I felt my soul calling me to come to America. I felt this deeper calling that said, go to America, go into this field. You're going to write books and give seminars and all of that stuff. And so
change people's lives.
Changed people's lives. And it didn't make sense because this was, pre-internet, 3 years ago. And it was just a calling that was so, sometimes what your soul guides you to do doesn't make sense to your mind, doesn't make sense to your logic, isn't always convenient or comfortable. And so you could say one of the first coming of ages into becoming a man was breaking my father's heart, where I knew that I would have to look him in the eyes and claim my own destiny and let him know I was not taking over. And I had to grieve that before I even told him, because I wasn't close to my father, but I loved him as this iconic man. So I knew that he would be heartbroken, and I had to grieve it for many, 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 many years, I would say, before I had the balls and the courage to do that. And so when I turned 17, 18, I think it was, I finally told him. We didn't speak for 2 years. Literally, we did not speak for 2 years. And it was difficult, but I knew I was on the right path. I've won a green card in the green card lottery to come to the US. And that's what enabled me to fly, and come to the US. And so it's been a path. Like when I came to the US, I was mad at my father because I felt so unsupported, unseen. I felt like I didn't have a father in many ways, right? And I felt as though I was abandoned by him. And so probably for 5 years, we barely spoke. For 2 years, we didn't speak. For 5 years, we barely spoke. And I had to go through a real healing. And it was probably around age 21, 22 that I went to a men's retreat in the forest, guys beating their chests in sweat lodge type environments, facing death, right? and I finally forgave my father. And that's when so much healing happened. I realized that there's one thing I realized, that he was not capable. Sometimes it's easy. We were talking about beliefs earlier. Sometimes it's easier to hold on to the belief, which is why it's very difficult to sometimes let go of certain beliefs. The belief like I'm unlovable and I'm not worthy, which is how I felt. I'm unlovable and I'm unworthy of love because he didn't love me. And sometimes it's so hard to let go of that belief because holding on to those beliefs can be a form of control.
Correct. And comfort.
And comfort. Because if I make myself, it's about me, I'm not lovable, I'm not worthy of love, then I'm kind of in control. Because if I go out and change my hairstyle, if I lose weight, if I go out and become super successful, make a lot of money, get the car, the house, then I'm going to be lovable. And so there's a form and there's an illusion of control, which sets you up for a never-ending chase in life to try to prove something to, in this case, my father, which is never fulfilling.
Correct.
The alternative is to surrender. And this is why it's hard, because like, shit, if I really surrender this belief, I'm not lovable, then I have to accept he was not capable. He was not capable, which, for a child can feel initially like I have no control, because if he's not capable, I don't have any control. I can't control him. But if I'm unlovable, then I can do something. I'm in control. It's a false illusion. So I had to accept he's not capable and grieve that process of realizing I may never get the love I want from this man. And when I went through, that was like a second phase of, first phase was leaving. Second phase was going through that forgiveness and grieving. And from that, I just slowly, as a young man, began to just be my own man. And I stopped seeking permission from my father and stopped seeking validation from my father and just kind of lived my life. Now, I will say, my father passed away in last year, 2022. And when my mother passed away, it's interesting, your mother told you that your father gifted you, gave you this gift. Right. When my mother passed away, I always assumed that my father would go first. He's 10 years older. Right. My mother went first. I was praying one day in my meditation, and I spoke to my mother's soul. I mean, was it really her soul? I don't know, but it sure as hell felt her spirit, right? Right. And I spoke to her and I said, Mom, why did you go before? Like, you're 10 years younger, like, why did you? And it was as though her soul said to me, I died first to gift you the relationship with your father. Because even though you're at peace with him, there's another level of healing. And so in that moment, I made a commitment to drop any level of grievance, of anything towards my father. And I said, I will love this man. I will take this gift my mother's giving me, because now she knew that by her getting herself out of the way, it would potentially open up a direct communication with my father. And so I made a promise that I would call my father. I would devote myself as a son. And I would call my father every single day for the rest of his life until he died. Whether he, and without any expectation that he would call, that he would do anything for me. It's like, if I love my father, I said, do I love him? Yeah, I love him. If I love him, then just love him. But he doesn't, but just freaking just love him. And so I decided, as a spiritual practice, I would, as a dedication to the divine, I would call this man every day and just love him. And we didn't talk about anything that profound. Just I'd call him up and down. Hey, how are you? Hey, Dad, you taking your protein powder? Hey, Dad, hey, thinking about you. Hey, Dad, did you eat today? And after about a few months, he realized something was different. And this very old school African patriarchal male figure just melted. And our relationship over 5 years completely healed, completely transformed on every level possible. And at the end of his life, there was so much love there on a soul level. And I would say and you could say I knew that the lesson was done when he died. Because when he died, I was at a level of peace that I knew that I had got the lesson, and we had served each other's souls. And when he died, it was like a final piece of just release and letting him go and stepping into another level of just freedom, in my relationship with my father. So that's a bit of a journey.
Incredible story. And I'll just, relate, I'll share something similar. So I had a very difficult relationship with my father. He was the one that started the company, the business, which I then worked for him. And for many years, did not have a good relationship with him, but similar. He was this very powerful, people loved him. He was an impactor. He was quite brilliant at the work that the company and I do today, but always resented it and never had a good relationship with him. Anyway, fast forward this, it was on his deathbed. And he looked at me and he said, listen, I know I was never a good father. And if there's any anger or anything you want to say to me now, or anything you want to get off your chest, or anything you want to ask, or just anything, like I'm moments away. Now's the time to say it to me. And I won't judge you and I won't be angry with you, but you could feel free to say anything. And boy, did I have a lot there. And I looked at this man and I went, you know what? This is for me. And I just went, yes. And I let it all go. And I said to him, I said, Dad, you know what? You did the best you could as dad, and love you, and will always love you. And that's it. And that was my surrendering, which created this new, call it, path for me, gave me my distance, right? So very powerful story, Kute. I relate to you tremendously, not just from the work that you do and the story that you told, but very personally, right? And I think, not everyone has these very intense fathers and stories and stuff, but it's just an acknowledgement of what you've described, which is to surrender. The only way forward is to let go. The only way to be light is to let go, or to surrender the weight that we all carry. And it's not, none of us, no one in this world doesn't carry weight, right? We all have a responsibility to let this, not let it go in quotations, but to surrender. I love the definition of surrender. It's very powerful. Man, if I had another hour with you, I'd keep you on, but I want to be respectful of the time, and we'll follow this up for sure. But at the end of the episode, we come to the most important question, which is, what do you think we could do to be better humans tomorrow? And I'll just say, I think you've already answered that, but I want to ask you, like, if we were to sum this all up, what do you think we could do to be better humans?
Yeah, I think we've said a lot. But I'll say something different so that I'm not saying what I said. If we all look at the world that we see today, we live in intense times. We're living in interesting times, unusual times. COVID pandemic thing that has been occurring, coming out of that now. But the world is in an interesting place politically and economically, and the world is going to go through some very interesting changes. It's easy to look at the world and feel frustrated, feel hopeless, feel, what the hell's going on? The world is going mad. Mm-hmm. But what I will say is, if you really want to impact the planet, the world that we see out here, in our governments, in our world, in our reality, in our economics, in our education system, the world that we see out here is a mirror projection of the totality of the consciousness of all 8 billion of us combined, projected out there. Right. So in a sense, there is no world out there. There's the world in here that is combined, projected out there into the world. And so the leaders that we see, the wars that we see, is a reflection and a mirror manifestation of our consciousness. So I think if we want to really impact the world, it's easy to point the finger at this president and that president and then Putin and blah, and Trump and Biden. Da, 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 da. But if we do that, the world will never change. Correct. Because the world is a mirror. And so if we want to do our part, we have to dare to be the change and ask ourselves, when I look at the world, do I like what I see? When I look at the world, when I look at my community, when I look at my government, when I look at my reality, when I look at what's around me, what does the world show me about myself? Mm-hmm. What does the world reflect to me about myself? Because I think if we're willing to truly each individually take responsibility for ourselves and our inner world, that's what we have the power and control to shift. We may not be able to change the government. We may not be able to change, Russia. We may not be able to change Ukraine, but we can change ourselves. And it's easy to look at, wait a second. I look at Donald Trump, I look at Biden, whatever people believe, as an example. Ask yourself, well, where it's easy to look at politicians and go, oh, they're liars, they're out of integrity. Where am I fake? Where do I lie? Where do I betray myself? Where am I inauthentic? Well, Trump is inauthentic. Biden's inauthentic. Well, that's great, but where am I inauthentic? Because you can't change them, but you can change yourself. And I think when we own that projection and we shift and bring our life into more in integrity, even if it's 1 degree, and we make that shift in ourselves, we do our part to open up that possibility in the consciousness for everyone on the planet. We look at the world and look at the wars going on. Well, where am I at war within myself? It's easy to look at the world and then do nothing. Right. But to look at myself and go, where am I dropping bombs of self-hatred, of self-judgment in my own consciousness all day long? Not just Putin and Ukraine. Where am I doing that in my own consciousness? And to start bringing compassion, to start bringing forgiveness, to start bringing kindness to those parts of ourselves that we hate, so that we can bring peace and end this sort of divisiveness inside of our own inner world. And I think if we are willing to do that and shift our inner world slowly, if we all do our part, then the world will begin to reflect back something different to us all as a humanity. And that's a gift we give to the next generation, And so let's do our part. We've got to be the change.
Amazing. That's the ripple effect I talk a lot about, right? We all have a ripple effect. It could be positive or negative. It really starts with you.
Yep.
Right?
Absolutely.
You are the man. What have you got coming up for the audience if they want to get in touch with you? If you got events coming in, obviously your book, we can pick it up on Amazon and I'm sure your website and stuff. But how can we get the audience in touch with you and
people
digesting more of your stuff?
People can get the book on Amazon, The Magic of Surrender, the paperback version. Depending on people listen to this, twice a year I do a very special event to Bali. 2023 is the last year I do this particular event. So if you're listening and you're someone who you feel you've been put on the planet for a purpose bigger than yourself, maybe you say, you're at the point of your life where you're ready for that next level. You're ready to heal, you're ready to transform, you're ready to free yourself of conditioning, you're ready to connect to your true power and voice and share that with the world. I designed a 12-day experiential seminar training without walls called Boundless Bliss. Wow. The Bali Breakthrough Experience. I've done 20 of these events in the last 10 years. This July, the 28th through August the 8th, we do number 21. And then December the 5th through the 16th, we do the final event. And so if you feel inspired.
And that's it. There's no more events after that?
Yeah, there's no more events in Bali. Bali. I'll do other events, but people can go to www.boundlessblissbali.com. That's boundlessblissbali.com. Watch the video and apply. My main website, Kute Blackson, Kute, Kute Blackson. You can go there. My podcast, Soul Talk, my Instagram, Kute Blackson, Facebook, Kute Love Now.
Amazing. We're going to drop all these links in the show notes and everything. Kute, I can't tell you how powerful this was and how much personally I got from today's conversation, and wish we had some more time, but we'll have to create another opportunity. To the audience, if you like today's episode, don't forget to like, don't forget to subscribe, don't forget to share. Let's go follow Kute Blackson. We'll make sure all the links are there. If you're interested in the Bali event, definitely check it out, but definitely a dude that you want to start digesting his content and his work and start learning. You are one of a million, my friend. Thank you for all you do. Keep doing what you do.
Appreciate you.
All right, everyone. Stay happy, stay healthy. We'll see you next week.